Paranormal or not, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? When I was 16, I was at a local mall by myself. I noticed a large man kept going where I would go, and just gave me a bad gut feeling. After about 15 minutes of him fueling me around, I go into a Starbucks, and sure enough, he fuelos. This Starbucks was right next to the mall's public restroom, and I so stupidly decided to go into the women's room, thinking he wouldn't fuelo. I go into a stall, lock the door, and pull my feet up so they can't be seen since the stall's lot didn't continue to the floor. No more than 10 seconds later, I hear the bathroom door open and someone walking in. The man stopped in front of my stall door and just stands there, facing it for what felt like minutes. He was so close to the door his boots were pretending into the stall. Then, without any words spoken from either of us, he left and I never saw him again. Scariest few minutes of my life, and I'm still so mad at myself for isolating myself in a bathroom. Holy shit, that's like a scene from a horror movie. Includes dumb decision to go into a place alone. Lots of horror movie behaviors only seem stupid because you see them in horror movies. Trying to find safe places away from others, investigating strange noises, and running in straight lines from objects incapable of turning to pursue are all things people actually do, and they do it without thinking. I got a lot less judgmental about those tropes after peering into a pressurized bottle wondering why it hadn't released. Took an ice cork to the face before I had a chance to realize that's how people working with explosives lose their eyebrows. I worked in a coffee shop in high school. One night, right around closing, this woman comes up to the counter looking slightly frantic and tells us someone is fueling her. We told her to come into the back with us and use the phone to call the police. As the office door closed, in walked a disheveled looking guy. He just stood there looking around the store for a minute or so and, not seeing her, turned and left. Never be afraid to ask for help from other people. I was about 5 or 6 years old living in Dallas, and I was in the nurse's office when the tornado warning siren went off. The nurse ran out of the room towards the other side of the school, leaving me behind. The lights had gone off and I didn't want to be alone, so I went to fuelo her and ended up on this ramp that connected both sides of the school. To the right of me was the cafeteria, and on my left was a wall with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was so dark outside that I could barely see anything out the window. The sound of the siren combined with the intense wind scared me the most. By this point I was in tears and I just stood there for who knows how long because I was so scared. Then the vice principal came running up the ramp, scooped me in her arms and asked whose class I was in. I remember walking into the classroom and seeing my teacher with a flashlight in her hands huddled with the other students in the middle of the classroom. 16 years later, Ms. May is still my hero. I fell asleep on the couch at around 6 to 7 p.m. and woke up at 4 a.m. in the middle of my backyard when it was raining. Jesus, I always try to forget about this. Whenever it gets stuck in my head, I find writing about it helps, so may as well. This was 3 or 4 years ago. Me and my friend were driving down a road in a very rural area. It was the middle of the night and almost pitch black out. I was driving. We were approaching an intersection. Still no lights, again, very rural area. My friend was trying to get my attention, and I caved and turned my head to look at her just as we were about to pass the intersection. Not a lot of cars in that area, especially at this time of night, so stupidly, I didn't slow down. I was petrified. We were passing through the intersection and a pickup truck was coming straight at us. I saw it in the window behind her, she didn't notice. The driver slammed on the brakes, honking at us, but it was too late. The truck hit us. I don't remember much at this point, just a lot of screaming. Woke up a bit later on the side of the road I think, and holy shit the pain. I couldn't even really tell where the pain was coming from, it just felt like it was everywhere, I could barely move. I woke up again later in the hospital and was just sort of there for a bit, half awake, half unconscious. After a few days of me being fully awake and conscious, two of my friends come into the room with a nurse. One of them breaks down into tears as they tell me my friend that was in the car with me died in the crash. I didn't even really understand it until I was released from the hospital. From then on, it was a mix of constant fear, guilt, and sadness. I had a broken arm and leg, cuts and bruises everywhere, and a mild concussion. For the next few days I just skulked around my apartment. I didn't go to work or anywhere, really, as hard as my roommates tried. I just sat around, mindlessly watching TV or staring out the window. My roommates hung around more, too, more for me than out of mourning. They brought me food, and made sure I was comfortable, although I think they were worried I might kill myself. The thought of suicide never even really crossed my mind. All I could think of was that I was responsible for my friend's death. I killed her. After a few days, my roommates came back, but they brought someone with them. It was the truck driver. I didn't recognize him at first, but he immediately broke down into tears when he saw me and started to beg me to forgive him. We both blamed ourselves for what happened. He came by for an hour or so every day for 4 or 5 days, and we just talked. Not always about the crash, but about anything. It really helped me feel better to learn that he was as guilt-ridden as I was. The day before I last saw him, I left my apartment for the first time in a week. I haven't seen the dude since then, and I hope he's made peace with himself. Sorry for the long post, but I felt it was relevant. Woke up in the middle of the night to horrific pain in my abdomen. Turns out I'd had an undiagnosed ulcer perforate in my intestines and it had flooded my abdominal cavity. I couldn't move and my 2.5-week-old daughter was in her cot next to me. That was the most terrifying thing ever. The pain was 10x worse than childbirth and I thought I was going to die next to her. It's nothing compared to some of these, but I got peer pressured into facing my biggest fear and it did not go well. On a trip to Mexico, my family pressured me into facing my terror of deep water by jumping into a cenote, very clear, deep, pool in a cave. Being 16 and an idiot, I eventually did, and panicked so badly when I hit the water that I actually have no memory of getting out. The next thing I knew I was back on land, crying and gasping for air. I apparently climbed back out on my own at lightning speed, but it was so stressful that I actually blacked out. It's the only time in my life, so far, that primal instinct literally overtook me. Flying from Denver to NYC, about 30 seconds after the plane leaves the ground the left engine explodes, likely a bird, they said. I'm pretty calm, but start getting freaked out when I notice the stewardess are all crying. Completely freaked out when we are getting close to landing and there are fire trucks all up and down the runway, and the runway we are landing at is way the hell away from the terminal and everything else. Wow, so I don't wish this situation upon anyone, but if it ever does happen to anyone you must get on the next flight. Some of my fellow passengers opted to take a train home. If I'd done that, I'm positive I would have never flown again. Fell asleep in the living room watching TV. Wake up around midnight to my dad walking past me. He heads to the side door, unlocks it and starts walking to the chicken coop. By the time he's outside I'm up and fueling after him, calling out in a whisper, "Dad, what are you doing?" No response. I think maybe he can't hear me despite being only a few steps behind him. Dad walks into the chicken coop and I lose sight of him for about 2 seconds. I walk into chicken coop and it's empty. I'm very confused now. There is only one door for the coop and I'm standing in it. Suddenly, there's a hand on my shoulder. Almost jump out of my skin and whirl around. It's my dad. He heard me walking outside, had fueled after me trying to call out my name, but for some reason I hadn't heard him. Woke up around 3 a.m., one night to loud tapping outside my bedroom window. My bedroom was in the basement of our house. I assumed it was raccoons or something trying to get into our neighbor's shed. After listening for a while longer, I managed to fall back asleep. In the morning I brought up the noise to my mom, who said she had heard a similar noise coming from that same side of the house, only she got out of bed and went to the front living room window to investigate. What she saw was a man emerge from between our house and our neighbor's place. He stopped in front of our home, took a long look before removing a pair of latex gloves, and then proceeded to walk down our street. I assume he was testing for weak spots or something, and luckily didn't manage to make it inside that night. I was watching The Exorcist when I was 16, and my grandmother came home and told me to turn it off because that was the last movie my grandfather watched the night he died. About 20 minutes later I saw him rocking in the chair next to my couch, and no matter how many damn times I pulled the blanket over my head, he stayed there until he looked at me, smiled and vanished. Still can't watch that movie to this day without freaking out about it, and that was 18 years ago. What was the scariest thing that ever happened to you? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you wanna see more videos like this one.